Andreas, you've called yourself a technical founder turned investor, now accidentally turned lobbyist. What was the turning point that pulled you from investing into shaping European startup policy?
I didn't even think of it this way. I noticed January last year, to 24, how a lot of my VC friends from the Bay Area, so I used to be in the Bay Area for 5-6 years, a lot of my VC friends there turned more and more hostile towards European tech, versus beforehand it was always more like, like ridicule, diminutive kind of discussions, and then it turned like proper hostile. And I think you see a little bit of this like now with Trump and Europe in general. I think the vibe is there. But I noticed this, and I was kind of like, okay, I hate this for two reasons. Because number one, 50% of what they say is just propaganda and not true, and like misinformation and like all this kind of stuff. And number two, the other 50% are very much true, and I can't really say which one is worse. So I kind of like, okay, we need to do something. And my original idea was I helped co-initiate like a large community that's basically around how to accelerate Europe, that got like super viral. But for me, it was very clear that you can't tell young, smart people that everything is epic. But if they're actually smart, they will figure out very quickly that the system makes them play on hard mode for no freaking reason whatsoever. And then I was like, okay, what can we actually do to just reduce systematic disadvantage of founders in Europe? And for me, the biggest problem Europe has in the startup ecosystem isn't like how many startups we have or how many scale-ups we have. It's the amount of acceleration startups actually get here, which is just handicapped at ridiculous amounts and multiple stages for no reason whatsoever. So for me, it was like, okay, how can you improve acceleration early stage? And that for me was ultimately simplifying incorporation, investing, and stock options. And the first approach we did here was with maybe like a full private, very simple holdco structure, like remote.com, but for holdcos. And then we realized that in Brussels, the so-called 20th regime, which we'll talk about in a second, was getting more popular. And I'm like, hey, there's an actual path to make this a real solution, like fixing the actual fundamentals of the system. And out of that, we refocused the whole thing on that topic. And then we launched in summer, end of summer, with EU Inc., which got very popular. And we will talk about it in a second. But basically, I never thought of it like, let me fix policy. And I still don't want to be a policy person. I do everything I can to avoid being a policy person. I, like everything I can do. That being said, you need to fix systematic problems. And if you are opinionated enough, if you are like, if you work in startups and you like constantly tell founders like moonshots and all this kind of BS, and then you are also not like thinking big enough yourself, then like, what are you even doing in startups? You know what I mean? So combine that mindset with ADHD and you end up with an idiot running after Brussels to get this kind of stuff done.
You're just a typical founder who found a problem to fix and no one else who
Yeah,
cared, and
then
so
like,
you just
yeah.
went for it. And
Single
now
obsession.
absolutely. And now for those who are less deep in Brussels policy, can you explain in plain terms what EU Inc. is and what the 28th regime means? Why is this the lever that could change the game for founders here in Europe?
Yeah. So if you don't know much about Brussels, welcome to the club. I didn't know neither before. They had to explain me literally every person. I was like, who is this? And like, that's the president, like that level. I might be joking, might not be joking. Okay. My team in the background
We will
will like
never know.
freak out when they hear this. So in a nutshell, the 20th regime is think of it as like as cloud computing. So instead of having one legal system that's like for each country, like you put one on the cloud, which is in this case like fully virtual. There isn't like a country that represents this. It's just a fully virtual representation. And you can say for any use case, like insurances, there's like multiple use cases, right? For this kind of situation, because it's pan-European, this virtual one counts, right? And the idea of EU Inc. is basically do that, but for a legal entity, which is a little bit of craziness because legal entity is like corporate law, which is a big part of like what a country is, A legal entity might also be employment or taxation, which like every country defends like crazy, right? But the topic got more popular, and it used to be the meme where everybody was like, yeah, that would be the right solution, but will never happen. Like literally, this is what politicians told me when we started in January. So actually, they told me this like years ago already, because I tried something similar already like a few years before, but like different discussion. And so I was kind of like, okay, this is actually becoming reality. And then we started over summer working on this. And then while we were working this, also the Draghi report launched with like 300 pages, and one of them, I think half of like one page or something, featured the 28th regime as well, and like using a pan-European legal entity with the 28th regime. And then for us, it was very clear, we can't really expect that the politicians know in details what startups need. And realistically, what they will do is they will go to McKinsey or some of those and ask them to like write like a suggestion, or like help writing a suggestion with the research and everything. And then it will be like a convoluted mess with a ton of feedback and nobody will be happy. So what we said, like, what if the startup ecosystem just does this? So what we did is we got together the best legal teams in Europe, which is like Oric, Osborne Clark, Burdenberg, like multiple others, like multiple legal people from like general counsel from multiple VCs and so on and so on. Wrote like an 80-page behemoth of like a legal document, how you could do a legal entity in using the 28th regime and what the compromises would be to still make it useful for startups, but also make it non-threatening for nation states. We published this, made it open source, had like 100 plus additional contributors, and had 16, 17,000, something like that, people signing this and basically saying, yes, we want a pan-European legal entity using the 28th regime for startups like right now. And those are people like Patrick Collison from Stripe, Taved from Wise, Paul Graham from Y Combinator, the founders of Volt, the founders of Bolt, the founders of Personio. Like you name any meaningful startup in Europe, the founders have signed this. You name any meaningful VC in Europe, the founders have signed this. And every association supported this. Actually, the associations made all of that possible because they pushed the 28th regime into the discussion in Brussels. They all signed this. Every community in a larger community in Europe, startups signed this. And then we were like, okay, so look, you want to do this for startups? Here, the startup ecosystem came together, did this. Can we just do this? And that's the current stage where we're at. Okay, so like right now, this is Schrödinger success. Like the next 3 months will decide if Brussels actually wants to do a clean solution or not.
And we will talk about also this community power, which is incredible and also shows a lot what is possible if you just want. A little bit later, I want to go back to also the point where this has started. And it was also in the frustration. And you have written about the hundreds of cuts founders face, be it notaries demanding in-person signatures, losing investors over paperwork, contradictory national rules. Can you share a story where EU Inc. would have literally saved the founder time, money, or even an investor?
Genuinely, I think half the people in this, like who are listening right now, will have their own story.
I
I
know.
had multiple startups where angels dropped out last minute, realizing it's actually GmbH, not the Delaware, because they already had experience with GmbHs, and they were like, "Screw that." I had VCs. My personal experience. We did like my very first startups, which was earlier this millennia, like at the beginning of the century. We did in Austria a startup, and we tried to make it as international friendly as possible. So like dual English, German, all the legal clauses that you would expect in a modern startup back then. Like we spent a frick ton of time and money to make this international investor friendly. We had like a tier one investor from the UK coming, and they did like 2 days of DD, and then they basically said us, look, we think you did a good job, but we're not willing to take the risk, and why should we? Just reincorporate into UK Limited or Delaware Inc. We know those. We have done those. We're way more comfortable doing that. And then we actually did that. And then the whole thing took so long that they kind of lost interest and dropped out of the whole process. I have dozens more stories like this. Like right now, I'm trying to invest in a Spanish company where the notary insists on an Spanish English translation, but my notary can only provide a German English one. Something like that. I didn't fully understand it, and
Yeah.
they sent back and forth emails. I have like right now like 30 email plus email thread where I pay like for each answer,
Of
keep in
course.
mind, and this is like, it's not like this one is hard to figure out, yes, okay, we will have now like a notary equity in Spanish. Okay, cool. But it's like, why do I need to solve a useless puzzle every freaking time you want to give a young startup money? And
Absolutely.
now imagine going to like an American investor and be like, hey, this is normal.
Hmm.
Like they're like,
Hmm.
yeah, call us maybe like a little bit later when the startup is like more established
Hmm.
and it's actually worth my time to spend that much time. I had like
Hmm.
angels telling me, look, I can do this, but I'm not going to spend 3 hours with my lawyer for like a 50K, 100K investment.
Which is understandable. Yeah.
Yeah. And my first reaction was like, only 3 hours, you know?
No.
That was my reaction, not like, oh yeah, I
Yeah.
understand. But like, only 3 hours. Wow, who is this lawyer?
Have you actually then, speaking about the 28th regime, have you noticed pushback from lawyers or from the community there? Because
No, lawyers love it.
they
Lawyers
love
love it. So like for context, the way we set up, so like 28th regime is cloud computing, pan-European legal entities like saying HR software using cloud computing. EU Inc. is a very specific app, like a very specific solution. Okay, so we are very in detail what we want and we don't want. All of that is compromises. One of the big compromises we did is we said we don't want to touch employment and taxation because countries will not give this up unless you niche it down to like a very small group of startups that make no revenue. And the goal of startups is to build big companies, right? But we standardize corporate law. And lawyers are like startup lawyers are very much in favor of this because that also means that they now can handle investments Europe-wide. That's a huge deal. And so they're very much in favor.
If EU Inc. were live tomorrow, you were mentioning the GmbH, like the German GmbH, like what are, let's say, three most practical changes a founder would feel when going from a German GmbH to opening an office in Spain or France?
Yeah, I mean, the German GmbH is like almost like a worst case scenario. I explained this to friends of mine in India and they thought I'm making fun of the stuff. I'm like, I explained them what a notary does and they like like very young guys, so maybe they're just not experienced, but one of them like asked me if this is more like a ritual than an actual business thing.
No
Like
way.
it's just like a cultural thing, like you just do this, like how when you go
Yeah.
to the church and they sanction your thing, like kind of like that, but they were very young, so maybe they just have no experience. But anyway, so we recommend like standardization of corporate law, new legal entity in every country, and through that you can do standardization. The other thing we recommend is creating a new pan-European legal entity, a pan-European registry for those entities. Because right now the registry, like the corporate houses, do not even share their understanding what their job is in Europe because they're like, they come from the Middle Ages. Keep this in mind. Like this stuff is like really old. So the idea here is like, just like leapfrog this, have like one new one and they synchronize to the others, right? Which also allows, you can do like an API for it. You can do like web interface, digital first, all this kind of stuff. The experience for a founder, ideally, is you have a website where you register your company. Think like Stripe Atlas. Afterwards, you have a standard company that all of your investors know. The equivalent in the US would be a Denver Inc. And you can press a button to send an email to an investor that they have a standard document that they have seen 50 times. They don't even need to ask the lawyer. They can just sign it. Think wisely safe. And none of that so far is crazy. Like that's a default in America. We're not talking like crazy frontier science here, right? This is the default in the States. But for us, it's like, holy shit, this would be possible. And additionally, you can now, because you have now this standard, you can do stock options in Europe standardized. So you want to give stock options to anybody, at least for now in the European Union, no problem, done. And because it's a standardized API, because there are actually a lot of European laws that you could use for a lot of good use cases, but they're just too complex to actually do. You can all of a sudden have like an API where somebody like a neobank can say we connect this directly with your bank account and everything, or you can have like HR software saying, hey, it's actually possible in Europe to hire across Europe. It's just a pain in the ass to do it right now. But like with this standard, you can like reduce that complexity, and all of a sudden you create an ecosystem around that. So ideally the next founder doesn't even need to go there to get a bank and there and there and there. They just like use one big provider that does all of it. And again, none of that is crazy rocket science. That's a baseline in the States, and we wonder why it's like harder to invest in Europe, right?
Yeah, and then you could finally just concentrate on what you're actually good at and create the next moonshot. I found really, really fascinating to see like the community that you could like put around it. Like you name dropped a few like just for the signatures, but in the past few weeks we saw also something that I still find rather rare in Europe. It's like dozens of founders, ecosystem builders, journalists, operators, all posting about EU Inc. Be it like Hanno Renner from Personio, Julia Bösch from Outfittery, or Robert Lacher from Visionaries, just to name a few from Germany, but there were so many more.
Niklas Sensch
You
from
showed
hundreds of them. Yeah.
Exactly. You showed that it is really possible for the founder community to rally behind one cause. And this really reminds us that what would actually be possible if we manage to do this more often, think about like Europe and not just each state on its own. And now, in very practical terms, what can each of us as a founder, investor, operator do to bring the European community together and build even more ambitious startups that conquer the world?
Cool. So first of all, like one of the reasons this whole thing works is because it's not just me. There's like a whole, like we have a core team of like 8 people roughly, and those are like the leaders of the largest associations, policy people from the largest VC funds, like tier 1 people, and like people who have like 10-year plus experience with the best emerging funds and so on and so on. And because of that, we also had like the initial network to kind of start that. I think what we tapped into is what people, I think even 2 years ago wouldn't have even thought of, is like a European identity.
So
And
much.
this is like hard to explain because in Europe, it's so normal that the nation state kind of like monopolizes the success. So like, this is a Swiss company, this is a French company, you know, and all the bad stuff is kind of like, yeah, Brussels, you know, they did that, you know, like it's Europe, boo, you know, and I now working with Brussels, I kind of realize how Brussels is almost set up that all the power is with the nation states, but all the, like if needed, the blame is with Brussels. It's very confusing and it's intentionally set up to be very slow and complex so that they don't overtake power, essentially. But more importantly, even 2 years ago, if you would have asked anybody to describe a European founder, they would have most likely only used negatives. You know what I mean? Like, what is a European founder? Yeah, like less ambition, different mindset, blah, blah, blah. Like all this
All the memes.
standard gaslight, standard propaganda we get from the States to keep us small, to make us believe we're small, to make us like in this position of like, yeah, we're actually just a small country in the middle of nowhere, instead of like, no, we are the largest consumer bloc. We have as much GDP as the US, which is, by the way, also a meme because they also compare it against EU and not like against Europe, you know. We are the second largest manufacturing hub in the world, you know. China is like 29%. We are like 17, 18% worldwide, you know. We are the leaders in machinery, in robotics and precision manufacturing. We're the leaders in AI. Like if you go to the States, to any like hyped AI, robotics, whatever startups, the founders are Chinese, Indian, European. The machines are German. The machines, you know, like what the hell are we doing? You know, and then like, oh no, the States, that is amazing. You know, no, they have a larger market. They have a more efficient market. They don't have the systematic bottlenecks we have. Remove the
Just on
systematic
language.
bottlenecks and language. Yeah, remove the systematic bottlenecks, and you have the same dynamism here. And that's basically the whole. This is why we're talking essentially.
So much.
You mentioned because you mentioned European founders, right? And this concept sometimes, or this accusation, okay, hey, they are less ambitious. You have a YouTube series called the Europe's Most Ambitious Startups, and what we found pretty crazy when we looked into this, you showcase really, really impressive companies and founders, right? They're into robotics, as you said. They're into sustainable fuels, into chemistry about sustainable foods and how to grow them. What patterns of ambition and then also execution have you seen across these founders that really everybody in Europe should copy?
So I think mindset is an outcome of a system. If you are in a system where you know that something is less likely to get big, what you will try is you will like protect your downsides. You have like multiple shots because it's less likely that one of them gets actually big. So mindset is an outcome of a system. But now we're like living in a time where if you build the best robotics company in a space, your customer doesn't really care where you're based because you built the best ones. So you're kind of like in a time where you can build a global company from everywhere. The problem is you're also competition from everywhere, you know? But I personally think uniquely robotics, precision manufacturing, machinery is something where we're like way better equipped with the ecosystem than, for example, social media, movies, like all this stuff, like marketing, classic SaaS even, you know, where the States just has a better ecosystem to start plus more money. The main thing that I notice with all of these founders is that they almost create a circle of ambition around them. And I strongly believe you're the average of the ambition of the 5 people around you. So if you just optimize, and the goal is not to get like go to a city where there's like thousands of founders around you, because like I used to live in San Francisco. I hang out with the same 5 to 10 people anyway. You know what I mean? The goal is that you create these circles around you of 5 to 10 people who are extremely ambitious, who are as crazy as cracked as you know, and you rather increase the frequency intensity with that small group, and most likely something bigger will come out. And this is kind of what most of these founders did. They built like within their team, but also within their like circle of founders around them. They built like almost like this I don't know, catalysts of ambition. You know what I mean? And if you go, for example, to the Monumental office, which is a company doing robots for bricklaying, so literally like brick by brick bricklaying, the office is like, there is like outside the robots, like building the actual walls. Inside, they build the robots. Upstairs, they do the computer vision models, you know. Next to it, you have the 3D printers. And like you constantly see people running around, constantly testing something. People are intensely like ambitious there, you know. With Riven, for example, which is a company doing literally gas out of air. So they take water, they take the H2 out of water. They take the carbon, basically the C2, out of CO2, so of air, put it together and have natural gas, or like synthetic gas in this case. If you are there in that workshops that they work, there's like a different vibe of intensity. This intensity has nothing to do with the location. Like I used to be in the Bay Area. Like I was like when we had to, at some point we had to switch to a WeWork because we lost our office for like a short moment, and I was like the first person in the WeWork and I was the last person in the WeWork. And like they literally sometimes shut down the light around me. And I was like, it's like 8 p.m., you know, like what the hell, you know? And they're like, isn't this San Francisco? You know, no, it's like, no, you know, it's like the intensity is the intensity you create. The ambition is the ambition around you. And I think that's very much something you can control and optimize.
Would you say there are certain places like hubs, universities, cities, regions across Europe where you would really recommend people to go?
I think there is hubs that have a right to win in certain areas. So like if you hear there's like a robotics company out of that region, you're like, of course, you know. That being said, I also invested, for example, in a robotics company in Slovenia that is doing insanely, it's amazing, you know. But that being said, just to name a few, because maybe it's useful for people thinking, like younger people thinking about their career or like their university. So the region around Zurich and Munich and Tübingen and like Lucerne, like this kind of like meta hub, in my opinion, is right now one of the most interesting areas for AI, for computer vision. And I'm not just saying like my opinion, like they introduced stable diffusion. They introduced like the winners of all AI competitions are there. Like, yes, obviously, you know, robotics, you know, like in Zurich alone, you have like what, like 400, 500, like you have like 400,000 people living there, like nothing. It's a village, no offense. And you have like 400 robotics companies, roughly. You know, I mean, that's insane. In Munich, you have tons of like deep tech companies doing heavy machinery. You know, like you have whole defense tech ecosystem popping up there. And the reason is you have all the precision manufacturing around this. And if you think about it, AI, computer vision, plus machinery, plus precision manufacturing together is robotics. So like this as a meta hub is extremely interesting. Then you have quantum. You have like a quantum engineering, quantum compute. You have like around the same region. It's very interesting right now. In the Netherlands, you have a small robotics hub establishing itself, you know, but you also have in the Netherlands like a whole like farm automation hub, because it's like one of the things they're really good because they're kind of like land constrained, right? You also have like a Imperial College is extremely good as well for robotics. The Estonia will become the drone factory of the free world, like Estonia together with the Ukraine, you know? So you kind of have like multiple hubs, you know, and then you have like, it used to be called climate tech. Now they call it deep tech because climate is no longer, you know, it's like too woke, you know, but like the Nordics is like insane what kind of machinery you have there. And you have like very, very interesting stuff popping out there, usually out of larger companies. So like there was like one company called Varjo doing VR premium products. And now like there's a whole ecosystem of like companies related to vision popping out of there. The Aalto University in Finland is like next to none. There's like, it's extremely good university. Zurich ETH, I don't need to tell you about ETH, you know, the TUM, the Imperial College, and multiple more. And then you also have like micro hubs around other education facilities. So, for example, in Vienna, there's like a small school called Spengergasse, which is literally for teenagers, like up 18 to 19 years old, that specializes on programming. And they have like an excellency program run by one teacher with no budget. There's people coming, like kids coming out of that program. Like one group raised like $500 million for the startup. You know what I mean? Like the amount of like micro bubbles that are currently happening around different ecosystems is insane. And I'm speaking of all of this, and I haven't mentioned, for example, Spain. And I just invested in a farm automation company in Spain that's building a tractor, which looks like a cyber truck and can like lift 4 tons, pull as much, can be fully autonomous driven, can like run 24 hours with hot swap batteries, and so on and so on. Like there's all these like bubbles. And the interesting thing that I think Europe needs to do is like 2 things. Number one is like kind of like improve the branding. If the States would have something like Zurich or like Munich or like the whole region as a whole, they wouldn't stop talking about it, and they would brand it cool. You know what I mean? And we're so bad at branding stuff cool. And the second one is start thinking in cross-regional hubs. So like the whole Tallinn, Ukraine, Kiev loop, TUM, ETH, this is like a few hours of driving, you know what I mean? Like the moment we start thinking in cross-regional hubs, because you can easily, if you're in Zurich, you can easily hire somebody from Munich and the other way around, And the moment you start thinking in these cross-regional hubs, you realize like, oh, this is actually a power player globally,
Yeah, and I think on that point, right? Because now in terms of branding, I mean, Silicon Valley investors, some of them they try to, or they brand Europe as this Europe museum kind of thing, right? But I
Of
mean,
course.
obviously, listening to you, and I fully agree, it's the exact opposite, right? It's like, what can founders do to really push that brand build up, right? That they say, okay, let's be confident about what we can do, what we have already done. Let's really push this.
A lot of it is just branding. So if you're a young founder right now, like early 20s, if you do a meetup, make the most insane, crazy meetup that like alienates 80% of the people, but the 20 that stays perfectly like you, like do that kind of meetups. Like if you do like a robotics hackathon, make it the most intense robotics hackathon ever. If you make a meetup, make it like the coolest meetup ever, like brand wise and everything, but like make it a brand that resonates with you. You know what I mean? And we recently did like a hype video for European tech because we couldn't find one, and like just as like we have this YouTube channel and like the editors had like spare capacity because I didn't have time. I'm currently raising my third fund, so I didn't have time to do the videos. So they were like, you know what, we just do that. And I'm like, cool. And they made like a minute of like the most intense hardware startups in Europe. And I'm like, hype, and that kind of stuff needs to happen more, and that kind of stuff can happen. And the interesting thing here is a lot of people think that they need to copy the States. Branding wise, I don't think it's really much needed. I think in the next 1 or 2 years, we will have like a very unique, distinct brand here that doesn't need to try to emulate the like the identity patterns of the States as much.
Yeah, and I really loved your concept about thinking along regional hubs, right? Because really, as you said, if you take Munich and Zurich, it's really just a 3.5 hour train ride. It's like a 3.5 hour drive. The cities are culturally so similar, right? Like Munich is just Zurich and big. And I mean, maybe some listeners disagree, but that's my simple concept of the two cities. The quality of living is insanely high. But if you then speak to founders or to startups in Munich, they're like, okay, I want to hire someone in Munich. Yeah, okay, but maybe there's someone in Vienna. Maybe there's in Zurich, in Tübingen, as you said, right? And maybe they have pretty good reasons to keep on living there, but still I think we can create a situation that we can work together, right? So I really love that concept. You once said, maybe on that last point, that if white papers could restart an economy, Europe would already be the market leader. So
You researched my shit post. Oh my God.
Of course.
I forgot that I posted it. Like I always like say this in our internal chat.
I mean, working forward from this, what should we do to really initiate action?
I genuinely think everything is system theory and you cannot change a system, period. And always like, yeah, but the politicians, for 99% of the system changes, you don't need politicians. And for the other 1%, politicians want to jump on stuff that works. I think we are too much in this, I don't know, mindset that the 90s will never stop and everything is like in the 90s, or like the early 2000s. And that's just how the universe will ever be, and I don't 100% agree, and always like people are like, yeah, we need to be more like the States and blah, blah, blah. I think with a little bit of like planning and direction and just like going for something, Europe can be in 10, 20 years a completely different continent easily, and I'm not thinking here policy. I'm literally thinking ecosystem. You know what I mean? And that doesn't take much. It takes like a few crazy people just doing stuff properly, and then kind of like self-assembling ecosystems around them and communities around them. Doesn't take much, I genuinely believe that anybody can start a hub in their region with like 2, 3 good companies, 4, 5, 6 really good founders, and a few young people who are completely crazy, and then you have a hub. You don't need like hundreds of people. You can start a hub with like a small meetup series. And if the meetup series becomes good enough, like that will be the thing. Tallinn now is like a defense tech hub because a few crazy people like Ragnar Sass and like a few others just started doing defense tech meetups. And then started like sending, like they literally started like just modding cars and make them war ready, and like crowdfunded that and sent the trucks like just down to the Ukraine, and like they just started doing that. And now like Estonia is kind of like the left hand and right hand situation to Kiev, and like organizes meetups, events. The meetups are now like that Ragnar organizes are like, I think 200 to 500 people. Like, I don't know why he calls it a meetup, at that point. So it doesn't take much. And I genuinely think that's like easily doable. And if you're a young person and you're thinking like, oh, does it mean I should go policy? And well, no, definitely not. Like my main advice for policy, like alphabetic order, don't, I would rather start an amazing company, hire the best people you have in your network, in Europe wide, and maybe organize like meetups so that like the next generation like gets pulled up with you. Or worst case, you have good people to hire from. And I think that that's easily doable. And that's the thing young people should think about doing,
And in all of this, because you said like, yeah, like we can really change the face of Europe in the next 5 to 10 years. In the end, it feels like it's really also a marathon. It's not a sprint, and we need everyone. On this note, because we really believe, and this is also our slogan, like that we want to share like how to scale a startup from Europe while staying sane. So my question is also, with your different hats, running Prototype Capital, YouTube tours, EU Inc. lobbying, and so much more, all at the same time, what guardrails do you use to keep this level of intensity without burning out and really like pushing through for the next 10 to 20 years?
Only work on stuff that you are actually passionate about, period. And number two, try to work on stuff where you have control about the releases, where you can do like small release, like where you have control. So I generally think burnout doesn't come when you have work too much. And I say this right now, I work too much. Like I do the fundraise as well, which is a whole thing, but burnout doesn't come from working too much. Burnout comes from a lack of sense of control. You can burn out your employees who work next to nothing, but just like keeping them in a very ambiguous, nervous state and like no control, like give them a project and kill the project. You burn them out instantly, even if they work only like 2 hours a day. You can work hundreds of hours a day, but you like constantly see that stuff is moving and working, and you will keep that up for a surprising long amount of time. Obviously, you shouldn't forever, because at sometimes you will face situations where you lose control and you shouldn't crash them, So you need to like balance this. But I genuinely think work on stuff that you're passionate about and have a constant stream of little successes. And for startups, for example, this means a launch isn't like one moment. You want to launch something every 2 weeks, like some announcement every 2 weeks, That's how you want to actually work. Yeah, that would be my advice.
So we have our last section in the podcast, rapid fire questions. So we
Okay.
just
This is low key telling me to make short answers.
But it's like 4 questions, super short answer to whatever comes to your mind. I'm gonna start with the first one. What's one European startup you think everyone should watch right now, which is not in your own portfolio?
Not in my own portfolio. Proxima Fusion, period.
One.
Yeah, like Proxima Fusion. I'm a big fan. I intentionally, like, I didn't invest because I came too late, kind of, but I know the founders very long, and they're like tier 1, like tier 0, like not even like world scale, solar system scale. Yeah, sorry, Melanie.
One founder habit you have seen that scales surprisingly well.
Care about details.
One bit of advice you think founders should actually ignore.
I would turn this around. I would say the only advice in startup that is true is do whatever you think is right. If you end up successful, you were right. And everything else is input, opinions, best practices, whatever, noise. You can use it to optimize your judgments, but in the end, you do what you think is right. If you end up successful, you were right. Only advice that's true.
And fill in the blank. Europe will win if
we stop being idiots. We right now send all our money to the States and complain that our economy doesn't work. You know what I mean? Like the amount of wealth funds, pension funds, retail invest money that goes to the States right now. And then the amount of discussion that the same geos, even the same people, have about the economy not picking up, It's like we're freaking idiots, period.
Andreas, this was a super interesting conversation. If people want to find out more about you, also the work you do, the policy making, right? Even if you don't seek it, where can they find you?
So if you want to support EU Inc., the easiest way is go to eu-inc.org/CTA. And we will have this in the YouTube descriptions afterwards. And if you want to know more about the fund and about what we do, is go to youtube.com/prototypecap, or just Google my name in YouTube. And that's like, there's like the stuff we do as a fund and like the stuff we want to highlight in Europe. The companies we film, most cases aren't even portfolio companies. We just think they're epic, like Proxima Fusion, for example. So yeah.
Thank you very much for this conversation.
Likewise, Christian, Melanie, thanks for your time.